Hello everyone, welcome to the next session of SAP Basis Training. In this session we will discuss about logical spool server. As we seen in SPAD in the printer management, so spool request is the one which is created in the initial stage when you are printing the output. So that means the logical spool server concept is a very important element in the print management. So let's see how the logical spool server works. If you see here, we have one spool server and we have different logical servers and different output devices. So far in SPAD what we have seen, we have created output devices, different type of output devices we have created. Okay. Whereas in our case what we did, we created a device and we directly connected to the spool server in SPAD. Okay, so the real spool server is this one, that the one which we have did initially when we are doing SPAD. Here what we will do in the logical server, we will group the output devices into one logical group. Okay, this can be one or it can be multiple. Okay, you can see here it can be one or multiple. That here what the idea behind that is that let's assume in your application server in our SAP system you have more than one instances, okay, or more than one application server. You can see here with the development system we have two different application servers, whereas you can create multiple logical servers, assign these devices into that logical server. It can be one or more. Here if you see, the idea behind that is you can identify some of the devices as a test device or production device, or you can group it together. Let's say here if you see, T means it's a test printing, okay, P means production printing. You can also create load distribution based on the spool server, based on this logical server group. If let's say you assign everything to one spool server and but however you want to have a load distribution based on some priority, then you can have logical server group which can help you to have load distribution in your entire spool management process. Okay, that is the use of logical group. Let's see how do we create a logical spool server. Okay, this is a typical example here. If you go to SPAD, you can see spool server. Here if you simply click there, same like creating the device, we can create a spool server. You simply click the display where you come to the screen where you can create a spool server. Okay, and here you can specify server class. Server class means you can specify whether it is mass printing or production printing or test printing. Okay, mass printing means you have lot of printing which is going on, or production printing means it's a medium. We can say test printing is quite few. Okay, that's what we represent here. And we can specify this particular server which we are creating is a logical server or not, and we can also point to some mapping. Mapping means where you will point this particular logical server. Okay, let's go to the system, then we can see this in more detail. Go to SPAD. Okay, go to the spool server, say change. Okay, now we have only one server here. Okay, this is a host name and this is the spool server, of course, by default, because we have only one. If you say create, here we specify the server name. Okay, server name can have maximum of 20 character please remember the server name is case sensitive. Okay, so best way to, and always use underscore to separate. So the total number of characters allowed here is 20 characters. So let's create a spool server. Let's say our base is trn01 spool server 01. Okay, base is training spool server 01. Now we need to specify the server class. Server class, what we have seen, we have different type of classes. Now it says unclassified. We can also keep it unclassified. Now it says unclassified. We have different type of classes here. Okay, the main class which we wanted to see is, first one is mass printing. Okay, mass printing and test printing. In the mass printing we can do mass printing, and we have this production printing and test printing. Or you can also say production printing, mass printing and desktop printing. It is basically the class to classify what kind of printers or what kind of purpose we are using this particular server name is for. Okay, let's say test server or test printing, and then we need to specify what is this server. It's a logical server. Okay, as soon as you select logical server, now it will display you mapping. The mapping means the name of the actual or the real logical server to which the logical server refers. Okay, so if you select here, you can see this is our server. Okay, so we map this particular logical server to this server. Okay, now we can save this one. Now we created a logical server. You may think, what is the real use of it? Okay, I can give you a typical example. Let's say we also seen the front end printing, right, in the desktop printing. So we said that it is better to reserve one work process in each application server to reduce the front end printing, reduce the workload on front end printing, stuff like that, because the front end printing is one of the very important tasks, or one of the resource consuming activity which may happen in the real scenario, because front end printing can be printed by everybody. Everybody would like to print it in their own printers which is connected to their PCs. Okay, in that case, what we can do is we can create a logical server and assign the front end printing to that particular logical server only. In that case, all the resources coming to the front end printing is coming from one specific logical server. Okay, that could be one better scenario. Otherwise, we can also have different printing. It does happen quite a lot of printing in bigger organizations, in engineering organizations, or in trading organization. Invoice printing and all will not have much traffic in the network, but in case of engineering drawings and stuff like this, it will have quite a lot of heavy load in the printing. Printing means all kind of printing. It can be a direct printers, or it can be a big plotters, or for engineering drawing, or so it can be any kind of printers which we are talking about. Now if you see, we have alternate server. The alternative server means, once, let's say you have many printers and you created one logical server and you assign to one actual server. Okay, that means one of the specific server. Let's assume this particular application instance, application server is not available. Then what happens? So for that reason, we have this alternate server. So in the alternate server, what we can do, you can specify another instance. If in case this particular instance is failed, for some reason you shut it down or some problem it failed, the logical server will automatically switch all this output device to the second server, the alternate server. Whereas the availability of the print server is always possible, that is alternate server. So how do we configure that? Go back to system again. Here you can specify the next server, okay, next alternate server. So in our case, we don't have an alternate server, or we don't have an alternate instance, so that's the reason we just leave it like that. Or we can also assign to another logical server, because the logical server also is considered as a alternate server, right? It's considered as a server. You can assign to another one. Since we saved this one, you have the server which is already available, the logical server. You can also assign to another logical server. Okay, in our case we cannot do that, yeah, since we have only one. If you have another instance also, then we can assign to that particular instance. So by default, let's not confuse this one. By default, every instance will be created as a logical server. Then only we can move on in our spool server configuration. So this also considered as one logical server. If you want to group all the specific printer resources what you have and want to put it in one logical server, then we can have the logical server created. Then you can have instance and the additional alternate server which is available for this instance. This not only one logical server for one specific instance, you can have more than one logical server. Let's say I want to have, right now I have one logical server where I wanted to group number of test printers. So I wanted to have another one logical server. I wanted to group the for example the production printers or the mass printers. So in that case I can create one more. Let's say basis training logical spool server 02. Let's say basis spools server for mass printing. Let's say we'll put mass printing. Let's say this is also a logical server. Let's select one of the instance, then save it. Okay, now we have two servers where you can use it for two different purposes. Okay, that is the idea behind that. Two different purposes means you can group the printers into two different logical groups, logical servers. Okay, whereas both the logical server pointing to one actual instance. Okay, this logical server again we can have alternate instance if it is necessary. It's like this you can do the grouping. One more thing we need to remember, that we cannot have more than two instances in one logical server. Now let's see what is load balancing. We also seen load balancing. What is mean by load balancing? Let's go back to our presentation first. Okay, in load balance we can allow every spool server to have an alternate server, that what we have seen. Similarly, we can also allow every spool servers to have load balancing. The load balancing is quite simple. Here you can use the alternate servers which we have defined as an load balancing server, which we have seen before, that you can have alternate server. This alternate servers also can be a group. Yeah, let's say if you see here, we can also select the logical group as a mapping or an alternate server. Whereas if you let's say we select one of the another group, let's assume this group is pointing to a different number of application server. In that case, if you want to allow load balancing, then you can allow load balancing. Then you the SAP itself will do the load balancing within using this mapping and alternate servers. Meaning to say, when you do a load balancing, the output request will not be sequential. Yeah, it's in that case of load balancing, then the output request will be distributed to all the servers which you are grouping into the mapping, which you are grouping into the logical servers. Okay, so in our case, we anyway have only one. Then in this is basically, if you have quite a lot of printers, then you can create this logical servers so that you can have proper load balancing within the entire landscape. Let's see how to transport the print landscape. Let's assume now we have created different logical servers and the setup we have created in our development system. This setup can be transported to one system to another system. The landscape of your setup can be transported to one system to another system. However, it may change. The actual spool server may change from one system to another system because your instances and the names and everything is changed. Yeah. However, you can also transport this one to different landscape. Let's say the configuration which you are doing is quite high, the number of printer is you are doing is quite high, then you can do that. In the normal situation, in practical scenario, maybe we don't do that in all the cases. I can give you some typical example, because in the development system and quality system, in development system we don't generally do much printer management. In quality system, of course, for testing we will do the real-time testing and quality systems. The scenarios which we will do transport management is mainly when you are creating some training system. For example, you copy your production system and do a training systems, and you wanted to have a different landscape of printer management into that training system, then we do this transport. So basic idea is that there is an option which is available. If you go to the system, you can see the truck. You simply click this truck, then you can do the transport. You have information here. Server definition may have been processed after the import. That means you need to change the server definitions after you import to the target system, because the target system may not have the same server. Okay, so if you select okay, now here you can simply say create a new request and say let's say BC training server spool server setup 01. I'll say save, then it create the TR. Okay, after that you know already how to check the TR, and we can also see the transport. Say go to SE01. If I go to the transport and see what is inside, then you can see what is inside. You can see the content of this particular transport is, you can see base str and sp01. Like that you can also transport these changes. Now you may wonder how we assign the printer to the logical server. Okay, if you go back, let's go back to our system, sp80, go to the we have created the spool server in this here, the spool servers, logical spool servers. Then we go to output device, where you can specify, for example, let's go to the change mode and let's take this printer and the spool server. Now I wanted to assign to the logical server 1 which I have created. So if I select 1 here, okay, the basis training spool server 1, save. Okay, and once you assign the spool server, you can also see what is the real server here. Okay, what is going to be the real server because this is a logical server. If in the other case, if you select the actual server, you do not have a, this is the real server, so you do not, this is a real server itself. So in this case, it will also show you what is the real server which you are going to work. And let's say I go back and take the next one. Also, I wanted to assign to the same logical server. Okay. Okay. Right now, logical server have two printer assigned to this particular logical server. Okay, let me save it. Okay, that's fine. Just give an information. Okay. This is about how to assign the devices to the particular logical server. There is quite a lot of options in this SPAD. This is not the only one which we are seeing. Let's assume now you created the logical server and assigned the devices to the logical server. Now you wanted to find out what are all the logical server or what are all the devices assigned to one specific logical server. Okay, in that case, what we can do, we go to do display, or we can also see here, if you go here, you can also see which spool server this is assigned. Okay, this is one way of seeing it. Otherwise, let's say if it is, this is too much to see, let's say if you go here, go to spool server and select this one, and you can see one button here where used list. This is quite useful in terms of when you are searching for programs or tables. Here also we can use this. If you select this and say, now you want to search the output devices which is using this particular server, or you want to see what all the logical server is using this one. Let's say first, right now this itself is a logical server. We wanted to see what all the output devices using this particular logical server, and select this one and say okay. Now you can see here, these are all the two devices assigned to this spool server. Logical server means in general this is a spool server instead of the actual servers. Okay, and this is one. And let's say if you select this one, the real server, it's a real server, where select this and say logical servers. You can see this particular real server is assigned to these two logical server. Like this you can search. There's quite a lot of options for us to explore here. Okay, now let us see what is spool request. We already seen what is the difference between spool request and output request when we are creating the printers. We have two different ways to see the spool request. The first one is SP02, that is your own spool request that we have seen before. Let's say get into the system. So there is two ways of checking the spool. The first one which we have seen is go to the system and say own spool request. Okay, then this will show the spool request which you have created. Okay, and the transaction code for this one is SP02. SP02 will bring you to the spool request you have created. This is your own spool request. Okay. The second one is how to manage the spool request. There is one more transaction code which is SP01, which has more powerful than SP02. That also you can go through this menu. If you go to systems, go to services, then go to output control. If you select here, then it has spool request and output request, both different selections. You can also monitor the spool request and you can also monitor the output request. Okay, so let's, if you want to come to this specific screen using transaction code, you can use the transaction code SP01 and it will come to this transaction code. And in SP02 you can do quite a lot of things. You can manage the spool request. Let's say you wanted to see the spools created by a different user, then you can filter it by the user, or you can also check by different dates or clients, and by output device. Like this you can find the spool request, also you can find the output request. So based on the selection criteria you can filter it. Let's say you wanted to delete some of the spool request, also possible. Let's say your spool request is quite, the spool request we created is quite big, then you want to delete some of the spool requests, also possible here. Some of other users spool requests also possible here. Okay, this is the SP01 is quite useful spool request in order to diagnose some issues in the SAP system. Okay, so if you check the spool request, okay, to view the output request you simply double click here, then it will give you the output request. That's what we have seen. This spool request, one spool request can have more than one output request. You can create output request from the spool request more than once if it is necessary. So however, right now this printer is directly printing to PRN some printer, okay, the one which we have created. So let's say we wanted to redirect this printer to a this output request to a different printer, that is possible. And you can see a small printer which says print with change parameter. If you select this one, then you can redirect this output to a different printer. Okay, let's print a different one. Let's select a different printer which we have created, maybe this remote printer. Okay, let's say print. Okay, we printed to a different printer. Say, do you want the device instead of this one PDF? Okay, fine. Okay, right now it says waiting, output device unavailable. Okay, now let's come back. You can see the status waiting. Okay, there is two status is completed. Now let's see what is the status means. If in case you find there is some status which is a minus symbol is just a dash, in that case that means this printout is not sent to the operating system. Okay, no output request exists. That means you created the spool request but you did not create an output request. Let's say for example let's go to SC38 again. Let's take our program. Let's check once again. Sorry, SU0. Let's check whether our output is enabled. SU3. Okay, we don't want print immediate. Okay, then go to SC38 again. We'll execute this program, execute it again. Now let's print to remote printer maybe. Okay, now we created the printout without immediate output. Now let's go to /n sp01. This is the print user I want to monitor, maybe from first till today, and here I can see a minus symbol. That means we created the request, we created the spool request, but there is no output request. Okay, if I double click here, you can see there is no output request created. If you double click the other ones which you have completed, there is one output request which is created. Okay, in this case there is no output request created. That's the reason it is minus. If let's say this is plus, that means the spool request is being created. That means it is still creating the spool request. Okay, once the spool request is completed, then it will come to minus because the spool request is created, but there is no output request. The next one is waiting, where we have the status here. The waiting means the output request is not yet processed by the spool system. Same like the status here, the output device is not available, so the output request is not processed. Okay, however, the spool request is created. Okay, this is waiting. That means waiting for the device, waiting to be printed. Then you can see one more status, which will be a spool the process PROC dot. That means the spool request is being converted to an output request. That means it's in process. Okay, that is process status. Then if it is being printed, then you will see the status is print. That means the output request is being printed by the operating system or by the device. Then you will see again completed status, which is basically, so it means that this is being processed by the device. Okay, it's successfully completed. And you will also see one status which is F5. That means there is a output request inside this spool request, but it has two different status. So right now we have completed, and completed is the same status. That's the reason we have completed. Or let's say one is in completed, one is in process, then we will have F5. That means there's two different status inside, so it cannot show you the actual status of this particular spool. So you need to go and see. That's what it means. So if there is a problem, then it's you can see a status called problem that indicates that it's really a problem. Right now this is not a problem. It says it's waiting. Waiting means it's still waiting for the device to be active. At the moment we don't have the device active. That's the reason it will say that this is us waiting. If it says there is a problem, that means there's a serious problem in this one. Okay, probably it can be an incompatible printer output which is being sent to a device which is not compatible for this printing. This kind of errors. Okay, this cannot be printed at all. That means in any cases. Okay, that could be the reason. That means it's a serious problem. And you will also find the status which is called error. That means there is an error that could be a network error or some printer error, which is really an error which this cannot be processed at all. Okay, then you will also find one status called time. If the status is time, that means the spool request is being created and by a specific time. The spool request is created with a specific time. That means the spool request is created. The output request will be sent to the output device in the specific time. That means it's waiting for that time. Okay, that is called time. That is the status time. So if you double click in any of these spool requests, then you can find the actual output request of each spool request. And we can also see some more options in this spool management. If you go to SPAD and let's say if you want to assign a server to all the devices which is available in your system. Okay, this happens when, let's say, if you copy it to a different system, if you make a database copy in or to a different system, and the spool server is not changed, then you need to change the spool server in all the in the next system. In that case, to the next system name. In that case, you can do a mass maintenance. If you go to utility and output device, then assign server. If you go back to utilities, output device, and assign server. So here what happens is you can see all the output device, or you can select the output device, okay, to a specific output device, and old spool server and new spool server, and you can do a mass maintenance. This comes in handy in case of you are making a system copy, or you want to do a mass maintenance, then you can do mass maintenance here. There is also quite a lot of options which you need to explore. Let's say this import export. You can export all the settings of the device. If you say export, this will export to a file. Okay. Okay, in here you can say, you can specify the file name, export file name, and you can export it to your front end. Let's say for this, for example, to the desktop, what we are now presenting to that particular desktop, or if you say server, then it will export to the SAP system in the server location. You can specify that. Then you can see, you can also do the Unicode check, and you export printer configuration, stuff like this. And when you, once you export it, if you want to import to a different system, then you can go to the same again and say import devices, then you can import it again. Okay, almost the same one. This is about importing and exporting. Actually, instead of transports, you can do import export, but in import export you need to, what you need to do is you need to reconfigure it again, some of in case of the servers and stuff like this, because it will be anyway different in the different system. So this is an option which is available. In general, what we do is this import export is mainly used in case of, let's say, you want to change some of the printer names in a in a in a bigger scale, or you want to do a mass change in the printers, then import export may be a very good option to do some mass changes, because you can export it to a form of text file, then you can do the modification, then you can import it back. It's some tricks which basically, when you do this kind of shortcuts method, you always test it in the development or a sandbox system. The template what you created, what you exported, and what you imported is correct, then you do it in the quality and production system, because these are all not the straight cut method. The recommended method will be from SAP is to transport these changes. Okay, the transport is always the recommended method, but these are all the shortcuts which is available in case of, like, when you are trying to find out some shortcuts, and you can do in case of, let's say, you are creating a new system which you wanted to import everything into one go and change the names, then these are all the shortcuts which you can use. The next, what we are going to see, how to maintain or how to manage the spool database. As we see in this spool database have quite a lot of information. This can be written in files as well as database. So it is very important that you manage this spool database in a regular basis. First, let's see how we can delete the old spool request. So it is mandatory that you delete the old spool request in a periodic basis. Otherwise, what happens is you keep piling up all the spool requests, and either it's a database or an operating system level based on what configuration you are using, which we have seen in the initial stage. So if you maintain everything, keep everything in the operating in the database size is going to increase day by day, which is going to have a bigger problem in the later stage. So in a periodic basis, it is important that you schedule a background job maybe for this specific program, RSP 01041. This is not 0, it's RSP 01041. This program, you can schedule it as a background job in a periodic basis, so that the old spool request which is created in your system, which is no longer required, can be deleted and cleaned up. Okay, this is very important to do that. So what this program will do, it will go and check all the spool request on the spool data which is available in the temsec or in the output request, will be checked, and it will be deleted based on the parameter we can define. We will see how to define this parameter. There are quite a lot of interesting parameters which we can define. So based on that, it will keep deleting. So it is very important you periodically do a deletion of spool request. And there is one more program which will help you to check the consistency of the spool request. Consistency of the spool database. This also can be a weekly check, maybe, to check the consistency of the spool database, because you are managing quite a lot of data here, whereas it is always important that you check the consistency of the spool database. Otherwise you can clear the spool request and you can start again, so that the spool work is the printer spool itself does not comes to a standstill. So it is important to monitor this as well in a regular basis. So let's go to the system. So before getting into the program, we will see how we can go to the temsec, how the temsec is being configured, or how we can monitor the temsec in first place. For that, we have a transaction code called SP12. If you go to SP12, you can see temsec administration, that is temporary sequential database administration, where you can do all the administrations. Okay, this is not spool administration, this is temsec administrations. In general, we don't do much here because it's once you configure it here, then we don't do much. But if you wanted to check, or if you wanted to check the memory allocation, you can check it here. Okay, how much memory is allocated for each client, and what is the temsec object, how it's been allocated, all these things. If you want to tune it here, you can still tune it here. And you can also check the consistency here, check the consistency of the temsec. Here you can see this basically checks the table TST01. This is the table which has all the data of the temsec, and this TST03 also in another table. So you basically checks in the table. So you can do quite a lot of administration here. If we can also check the parameters related to temsec. Okay, if you in case if you wanted to find out what is the parameters related to that one, then you can find it out here. Okay, now let's go back to the program which we seen. Let's go to the first program. Let's go to SE38. The first program is RSP001041041. Okay, this is the program. If you execute this program, you can see different status here. You can see without output request. So the spool request without output request older than 10 days should be deleted. That's what it means. Okay, you can select that, or you can also change this dates. I think 10 days should be more than enough. To process it in bigger system, we will keep it for 3 days some system, and 3 days some system 5 days. So whenever you change these kind of things, you need to make a decision with the business how long they wanted to keep it, because this is also going to affect the database, and the business should not be affected with this. Okay, and same like that in progress status, how many days you want to keep, if it is more than 30 days, or completed ones, whether we can delete it, we can shorten this period, or incorrect. And you can also specify the calendar which include work days, or include all days, so that this will calculate based on that whether it's the working days is included or not included. And then we have the system and which client, and we can also filter it by that, or who is the creator. Based on the creator, let's say some background jobs which creates a lot of spools which you wanted to delete it quite often every day, then we can schedule a different set of programs, the same program, a different variant you can create and you can schedule like that. Okay, this is the deleting spool request. And next one is the consistency check. Okay, if you run this program, you can see the consistency check. If you run the program, you can see You can see the number of spool request is 178 and number of print request is 8. Okay, this will do a consistency check. This is a consistency check, simple consistency check, which far easier than the SP12. It's quite easy to check it. Okay, with this we are coming to the end of this session. Thank you very much for listening. I will see you in the next section. Bye bye.